We begin tonight with a political shocker, the second high-profile resignation because of the SNC-Lavalin affair, and this one strikes the very core of the Prime Minister's office. Gerald Butts, Trudeau's principal secretary, has stepped down over allegations he or someone in the office tried to pressure former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in the criminal case. Butts vehemently denies those claims. He is leaving anyway because he fears he has become a distraction. We'll look at where his departure leaves the government. But first, Katie Simpson starts our coverage with the announcement that took Ottawa by surprise.
Katie Telford and Gerald Butts, my friends and compatriots, thank you for what you've done.
Gerry Butts has been by the Prime Minister's side from the start. So trusted as Principal Secretary, Justin Trudeau has said when Butts speaks, he speaks for the Prime Minister, making this resignation all the more shocking. In a statement, Butts adamantly denies allegations he or his office pressured the former Justice Minister to end the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. But the fact is that this accusation exists, he wrote. It cannot and should not take one moment away from the vital work the Prime Minister and his office is doing for all Canadians. It is in the best interests of the office and its important work for me to step away.
I, of course, will miss him personally, as will all of those who surround the Prime Minister every day and all of those who carry on this work.
For him to resign means that this scandal is extremely serious and the government appears to be covering up the truth.
Butts is now at the center of the SNC-Lavalin affair. Nearly 2 weeks ago, the Globe and Mail reported Jody Wilson-Raybould was pressured by the PMO last fall to kill the court case against the Quebec engineering giant. Trudeau has repeatedly denied that.
The decisions she makes as Attorney General, particularly in this matter, are her decision, and I was not directing or pressuring her.
An ethics investigation and a Justice Committee probe have already been launched, and with Butts' resignation today, the NDP is calling for more.
What we're seeing now is something that looks like a pretty surprising potential admission of guilt. And at this point, we are bolstering our argument for a public inquiry.
The Prime Minister meets in person with his cabinet tomorrow. It's the first time since losing a star minister and now his closest advisor. Justin Trudeau's inner circle needs to stop the political bleeding, but that won't likely happen tomorrow, since Trudeau will face scathing demands from the opposition for transparency in question period. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
There are few positions in government as powerful as the one Gerry Butts just left. The right-hand man, Trudeau's political confidant, along with Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, the trio formed the center of decision-making for this government. But Butts is more than that. Justin Trudeau also describes him as one of his best friends, though their backgrounds could not be more different. One, the privileged son of a prime minister, the other, the son of a coal miner in Cape Breton. From their time as students at McGill to Trudeau's wedding, Butts was with Justin Trudeau from the moment he decided to run for Liberal leader. He's been a constant presence and a key architect of the campaign that propelled the Liberals to victory.
We've taken a team approach from day one. The leader of it has done a phenomenal job, and that's Justin Trudeau. So we're very proud to work for that man tonight.
Trudeau has always seemed aware of how much he owes Butts.
Katie and Gerry are two of the smartest, toughest, hardest working people you will find anywhere. They share with me the conviction that politics doesn't have to be negative and personal to be successful.
From then to now, Butts has been central to the Liberal government. He helped craft the narrative, the story Liberals wanted to tell Canadians, pushing the government's signature Canada Child Benefit and carbon tax. Butts has also been described as Trudeau's safety blanket, his enforcer on Twitter and in caucus. Critics called him the puppet master, the brains of the operation, the Liberal most willing to publicly pick fights on wedge issues.
I think that people have been underestimating Mr. Trudeau since before he was in public life, and I think it will probably continue. I think he's done a truly remarkable job.
Which is part of why the Prime Minister today thanked him for his friendship, and why no one here thinks Gerald Butts is going too far from the Liberal Party. As for the actual investigations into this whole affair, the SNC-Lavalin controversy, tomorrow the House of Commons Justice Committee will meet again to debate other possible witnesses in its probe. Last week, the Liberal majority voted down calls to have some key players testify, including Jody Wilson-Raybould, Gerald Butts, and other senior members of the Prime Minister's office. So all eyes will be on that committee tomorrow afternoon. So there's a lot to watch for and there's a lot to ask. Is this enough to take some pressure off the government? Or does this just delay the pain until Jody Wilson-Raybould finally speaks, if she speaks? And a lot for At Issue to tackle. Andrew Coyne and Rob Russo are here for a special edition that's coming up in...
Mr. Butts is a very important figure in the government, so his departure, of course, will be missed.
For him to resign means that this scandal is extremely serious, and the government appears to be covering up the truth.
What we're seeing now is something that looks like a pretty surprising potential admission of guilt.
Just some of the reaction to today's political stunner. As we've been telling you, the Prime Minister's principal secretary, Gerald Butts, has stepped down. He says that he denies pressuring Jody Wilson-Raybould on the issue of SNC-Lavalin. So why resign? And what kind of hole does this leave in government? It's only Monday, but you better believe that we called in At Issue for this one. Andrew Coyne, we tracked him down in New York tonight. And Rob Russo, CBC's bureau chief, is with me here in Ottawa. Okay, let's start with that part of the letter. I'll start with you, Andrew. It says very clearly he didn't do anything wrong, but wants to leave to take some of the, I guess, the pressure off the Prime Minister's office, defend his reputation on his own. Is that how that message will be interpreted by Canadians at large, that this is sort of over because Gerald Butts has left?
No. Look, this is an earthquake. You don't lose somebody as central to this government, as close to this Prime Minister, over a momentary problem or a public relations issue, et cetera. I know there's some grumbling in caucus about the way the government's been handling this, et cetera, but that's not enough to precipitate this kind of action. The only reason this would be happening is if they're anticipating extremely bad news. I'm struck by a couple things in his letter. One is the defense of his own personal, saying he personally had been accused. I have not seen that publicly. I've only seen references to unnamed officials in the Prime Minister's office having been accused. And secondly, his insistence on what a close relationship he had with Jody Wilson-Raybould.
So it's an attempt, Rob, then to move the issue just further away from the Prime Minister's office then?
Yeah, I think Andrew's right. I don't think it'll have that effect at all. I think the short-term effect is to reinforce the notion that this is a government that is in some cantankerous disarray and has had a miserable first 7 weeks to 2019, beginning with the firing of John McCallum, and now ending up with the departure of Justin Trudeau's best friend of 3 decades and the man who charted his ascendancy to power beginning some 15 or 20 years ago at the funeral of Pierre Trudeau, when he helped write the eulogy for his father. So, I mean, the word bombshell does get tossed around rather easily in this town. This really is a tectonic development.
Except if we were to compare it with, and it's not an apt comparison, but if we compared it with the Nigel Wright leaving Stephen Harper after admitting that he had given that $90,000 check to Mike Duffy, there was an admission of guilt, walked away, and it allowed Stephen Harper to sort of say, not my ball of wax, didn't know anything. In this case, there's no admission of anything done wrong, and I'm going to have to take him at his word that he doesn't believe he did anything wrong. So it doesn't really help. I'm not sure how it helps the Prime Minister's office in any real way if you can't distance yourself from it. But yeah, go ahead.
What it does do is, if he's in that office, it's hard for him to be the public face of defense and an aggressive counterattack, even though Mr. Butts has never been shy. Anybody who follows his Twitter feed knows that he's an unusual principal secretary and that he has a very public face that way. But he will now be unshackled from his day-to-day duties and from any reticence of making public comments about what Jody Wilson-Raybould said. And as Andrew pointed out in his note, he said, I was the contact point for Jody Wilson-Raybould Jody Wilson-Raybould in that office. I was the one who dealt with her, so he will have questions to answer, but he also will have information to impart as well.
Okay, Andrew?
First point is Nigel Wright's departure certainly didn't take that issue away from the Harper government. No. They dealt with it right up until the election. It really hurt them badly.
That's true, yeah.
Secondly, as important as Nigel Wright was in that government, it is dwarfed by the relative importance of Gerry Butts in this government. This is absolutely a body blow to this government. Third thing is, Mr. Butts, if again, going by that letter, talks about defending his own reputation. So if we take that as meaning something, yes, he'll be freer to talk about and defend himself, but he would not be acting, it seems to me, on an issue as important as this without the Prime Minister's say-so and without the Prime Minister's involvement. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it seems to me unlikely. So even if he's able to deal better with defending his own reputation and his own conduct in that doesn't take this away, and certainly won't take the opposition's focus away from what was the Prime Minister's knowledge of this and how involved was he in this.
I never like to suggest that one person is so central to the government that it's going to fall apart. We know lots of smart people inside the Prime Minister's office, and certainly his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, is one of them. But the relationship between these two people, the Prime Minister and Gerry Butts, I think was different. We tried to explain that a little bit earlier in the show in terms of their personal relationship. What would you imagine this departure would do to their strategy over the next few months leading up to the election, or even the election? You know, maybe he will get involved, but for now, what do you think that departure will do? Andrew, why don't you start, and then Rob?
It's huge. Look, you know, Justin Trudeau may have many strengths, but nobody thinks he's the genius of this government. Nobody thinks he's the organizational or strategic genius of this government. Gerry Butts was very much the brains behind the Prime Minister, both in terms of the way he presented himself, his strategic positioning, etc. So to lose him at this stage with only a few months left of the election, granted, if he is proving to be a distraction or is going to be a distraction, it takes that away to some extent. But you're also losing an enormous reservoir of knowledge and background and knowing how the Prime Minister thinks and how he ticks and keeping him on board and keeping him stable in the face of huge pressures. This is a huge loss to the government and to the Prime Minister personally.
Rob.
Yeah, Mr. Butts was already deep into election prep, was talking to a lot of staffers about what they needed to do and how they needed to frame the election, was telling people, for instance, things like, if this is a multiple choice election, we're going to be fine. If it becomes a referendum on Justin Trudeau, we're going to be in trouble. So he was already trying to frame the election for people, deeply involved that way. Also, a lot of people thought that he was the ideologue, the incarnation of the Trudeau the younger, neoliberal. And with that gone, a lot of those ideas might be gone. But I'm old, and I do remember Bernard Roy, who was a very, very good friend of Brian Mulroney's, very, very tight chum of his, was Chief of Staff as well, left after some messiness, and Derek Burney came in and cleaned things up, and Mr. Mulroney's government went on to have some successes, notably on free trade. So you can pivot and move on.
Last question. We did 2 ad issues last week, Rob, if you were watching. Now we're on our first for this week. We're going to do at least 2 this week. Do you think that we are nearing the end of it, or really ramping up towards something else? Andrew?
Not by any means, and not only on this issue. There's also the looming question of the Vice Admiral Norman trial, in which there have been allegations or suggestions that the Prime Minister's office and officials within that were too closely involved there. So that's also looming the horizon. I think the other issue that people could raise is it healthy to have a Prime Minister who is so dependent and so close to one person? Because there have been grumbling about some of the handling of the other issues, and with a more normal relationship between a Prime Minister and his Principal Secretary, you might have seen this parting of the ways come earlier. But when somebody is so close to you personally and you're so dependent on them, maybe you get to the point where you can't, unless things get really serious and really bad, you can't let go of them.
Rob?
It's all in the hands of Jody Wilson-Raybould now. If she wanted to wreak vengeance on her government, she has certainly done that. The government, as I said, is in some chaos. She has now managed to engineer the departure of the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister. If that's enough for her, she may say, I've inflicted damage, and that's enough damage if I want to stay a Liberal. If not, if she chooses to speak and speak in a more accusatory tone, this mushroom cloud is going to continue to billow out further.
Okay, well, I'll just be interested to see if Jody Wilson-Raybould shows up at work tomorrow. That'll be an interesting place to start. Thanks, everybody, for this Emergency Monday at Issue. Appreciate it. And if you want to hear more of At Issue, you can, of course, go to our podcast, subscribe, look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.